Welcome to the Solo Mo Show, a weekly podcast hosted by Corey O'Brien, the social media strategist at Heat and author of thefutureofads.com.
And I'm Adam Helway, CEO of the digital marketing agency Secret Sushi Creative.
Each episode, we discuss the intersection of social, local, and mobile. Our goal is to help you understand these topics so you can integrate them into your marketing and advertising. Today is April 3rd, 2012, and this is episode number 13. And today we are going to discuss marketing with images, including a look at some of the changes going on with Instagram. We're going to talk a little bit about Pinterest marketing and some interesting campaigns we've seen there, some initial research coming out of Facebook timelines, and finally a look into the future and whether or not everything will look like a coffee shop.
Like a coffee shop?
Yeah, like a coffee shop. That's a thought-provoking topic right there.
I know. I'm actually really excited about listening to our show today.
As am I. It's been I've been looking forward to talking about that one for a while, so we'll have to make sure to save some time for that and really dive in. I think that's an interesting one. But in more recent news, today, and actually just a few short hours ago, Instagram made its debut on the Android platform. This was a highly anticipated event, I would say. There were a lot of folks on Android that saw Instagram as maybe one of the hot iPhone apps that they were hoping would eventually find its way into Android, and now it's there, and we're already starting to see a large number of Instagram or new Instagram users add it to their Android phone and already starting to post pictures. I don't know about you, Adam, but I've seen a pretty solid increase in the number of people following my account recently that I can likely attribute to being new Android users.
Well, I think it was, maybe it was earlier today. Was it early today or was it late last night when they released it?
Oh, I thought it was like midday today, but I could be wrong on that.
Well, no, I just remember seeing suddenly a few folks that I've been connected with on other networks, because Instagram is directly connected to Facebook. So if somebody on that you're connected with on Facebook joins Instagram, it kind of tells you, hey, your friend from Facebook is now on Instagram. And so suddenly I see a couple people pop up and I'm like, this is a little weird. It's just because really for me, it's all the folks that have been connected with me on Facebook for the most part are already on Instagram. And so you don't see that happen that much. And then you just saw this kind of sudden spurt of folks starting to follow you from Facebook or saying that they've joined Instagram from Facebook. And so I knew something was up. And then that was when I had seen all the tweets. It was the big celebration from the Android folks.
Yeah. And it was probably slowed down a little bit by the fact that a lot of Android users were having trouble even finding the app. I guess if you searched for Instagram, there were a number of other applications that had used that as a keyword and had already ranked high in the Android store, and so users were having trouble finding it, and you had to kind of go directly through Instagram to get the link or have a link sent to you. It was a little difficult to find it if you just searched for Instagram. So that was an interesting struggle, though I'm sure as people download this thing, it'll shoot to the top of the charts of any search that uses the word Instagram.
And so far, the New York Times has said that it's getting 2,000 signups a minute right now.
Wow, that's impressive.
Now, whether they continue to actively use it, we'll see. But we've got iPhone users with pitchforks and shovels and pickaxes and stuff all standing at the gates trying to fend off the Android invasion for some reason.
Well, there's always everybody. I think some people liked the fact that it was sort of this really cool application that only the iPhone users had access to, and they were trying to keep it to themselves. And so now it feels like, oh well, the normals have it now. The Android users.
The normals.
Though, from what I understand, it's not 100% compatible with all Android. There are a couple of phones, and even some of the more popular phones, that for one reason or another the camera isn't supported, or they haven't fully worked out all the bugs. So there's still a little bit of room for improvement. There's still a little bit of smoothness inherent in the iPhone app that hasn't quite transferred over to Android yet.
And I wonder why they took so long to develop for the Android device. I mean, come on, it's only one platform, right?
Yeah, exactly. One platform with 600 different design variables. So
exactly.
Along with the announcement, though, they released a couple of updated stats, which some of these have been released before, but I thought it was interesting to see them all in one place. So First off was the fact that they had 430,000 users add themselves to the Android waiting list, which is just insane. It's basically they just gave them their email address so that they would be first in line to know when this thing launched. And so 430,000 people signed up just for the earliest of early access. They've got 30 million plus registered users, and just a couple weeks ago at South by, they were still at 27 million. So even in those couple of weeks, they've added 3 million new registered users. They've got a total of 1 billion photos uploaded, which is, I have trouble even comprehending that. The amount of data that must look like. The size of their servers has got to be astronomical and growing, but 1 billion photos, 5 million photos per day. So, just again, a huge number of photos going back and forth. 575 likes per second. So tons of interaction on those photos that are getting uploaded, which is awesome to see. And also 81 comments per second, which is really interesting. I think, seeing a lot of comments on the photos definitely shows that this isn't just an outgoing medium. It's also bi-directional, and people are really using this as a way to interact, which I think leads quite well into a post that you wrote recently, Adam, about using some of these various image services to market your product. So maybe you could give us a quick rundown of that blog post, and we can talk about some of the things you found.
Sure. I titled the post, "Do You Have an Image Problem? Here are 3 ways to solve that." And it was pretty much inspired by a post that I had seen a few weeks ago regarding, I think, and I really wish I remembered the name of the individual, but it was a nice short post regarding the fact that marketers, brands, organizations, and so on needed to have an image strategy, a strategy on how to use images to market themselves. And it made me think a bit, again, coming from a design background, that I kind of feel like images, like visual marketing is finally getting its just due. It's getting its time in the limelight now. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of funny because in a lot of ways, images have been around for a long, long time. It's not like it's not like all of a sudden the web had an upgrade and we can put images suddenly on the web. Right. It's just that the dynamics of some of these sites, including even Facebook with the new timeline, have kind of leaned in the more visual side of things. And a lot of folks they're so used to kind of broadcasting and using text as that means to broadcast, that they haven't really thought about how to really visually communicate with maybe less words even, and more, just straight visuals. And visuals can really kind of evoke emotion and feeling and kind of enhance the experience and stuff. So at any rate, it was inspired by that post, and I just kind of went through and wanted to jump on that same theme, and ended up writing a pretty long post about kind of 3 major trends that I saw. One would be infographics, mm-hmm. and another was the popularity of Instagram and the power that Instagram has for marketing, and how to do so, and then of course Pinterest. And I kind of actually paired them up with trends, data visualization, sharing an experience and images rather than words, and then curating and collecting. And I kind of did a quick overview of each, and why they had why should you even pay attention to any of those different trends and these other networks and platforms, and then some pros and cons and tips. So it's a pretty long post for somebody that might only have a minute or two to read, but I went at it, and I think that it's really, really relevant for what's going on right now. And as we talk here through our episode today, we'll really kind of touch on some of these points, and we could potentially, revert back to some of the things I mentioned in the post as we talk. But in general, I think it's an important thing for brands to think about these days.
Yeah. And I think it's a challenging thing as well. And, you mentioned that the web hasn't necessarily gotten an upgrade recently that has suddenly created the use of images. But at the same time, I think, as more and more households have broadband, and, we've got the LTE iPad out now, and fake 4G iPhones, the ability for our gadgets and our technology to actually process and download more image-based content without slowing down our usual workflow. I think that is something that, it's been growing for a while, but now it feels like it's finally at a place where most people have enough of an internet connection and enough speed and enough data that they can interact with some of these images, and they can, run a mobile network like Instagram that has a lot of data going back and forth. Whereas a couple of years ago, that would have chewed through your monthly data allotment pretty quick. So there is sort of a technology shift that's happening as well that has helped along some of these trends. But I must say, Adam, I was a little surprised you started with infographics, which seems like one of the more challenging visual elements for a brand to create.
And I did say that. I mean, I actually did end up kind of echoing that in what I say, because there is so much, it's collecting data, having a design resource, whether that be in-house or you outsource it to a design agency. I mean, we've done a few infographics for clients, and it's definitely similar to any other full-on design project where you've got to really, really think about what are you trying to communicate, and it's solely one big image that's got to communicate all that stuff. So I agree. It is more complicated than, well, I don't know. Let's say it's more complicated. It requires just focusing directly on it as a design piece in comparison to using a social network or shooting a photo per se, right?
Yeah. And I guess part of why I said that it's complicated is I've sort of almost become, oversaturated with infographics lately, and I feel like I've started to turn a blind eye towards a lot of them. And I used to kind of look forward to infographics, and each one felt like this really interesting art piece that somebody had spent a lot of time putting, research into and really crafting the way that the visuals were going to enhance the information that they were trying to get across. And you felt like by looking at this thing, you were understanding a topic that maybe you wouldn't have understood if you were just reading a blog post about it. But there's definitely a challenge that brands face with reaching that level of, expressiveness and being able to tell a story with an infographic. And I think a lot of them that I've seen recently look more like a collection of pie charts and bar graphs that somebody slaps together and calls an infographic. So, do you have any tips for brands that, are looking to get into infographics, but want to avoid the pitfalls of just, slapping together something that people maybe they look at briefly, but it doesn't draw them in the way that a really engaging infographic would?
Well, I mean, it's not about creating like one big long informational slide like you might find on a PowerPoint presentation or something, right? Mm-hmm. So like you said, I mean, you almost took the words right off of my post in regards to slapping together a bunch of stuff with pie charts and graphs and so on. But an infographic is an opportunity, just like you said as well, to tell a story, to almost have a narrative, and to take advantage of the overall aesthetic the overall aesthetic of that image, of the entire infographic, and create an experience behind it. So you can actually take data, which is just, information. That's it. And you can give some emotion and feeling to it in a way. It's almost what you shouldn't be doing with data, but in a way, that's the power of it. Is you're able to give it some emotion and feeling, and make it almost steer in the direction that you want it to, based on, for instance, the theme that you apply to that infographic that you create. And so I think the unfortunate thing is nowadays people are gravitating towards any infographics. It's like you really enjoy it. You are getting a bit oversaturated with it, and that's likely why you might turn off a bit. But there's still kind of a voracious crowd of folks out there that really enjoy infographics for one reason or another. And I mean, there's so much so in my mind that a lot of times I don't have a chance to do more than really just skim through them really quickly and quite honestly toss them into a Pinterest group that we have that just collects infographics. And so I've seen more than 90% of people just completely due to that. I mean, even to look on it in Pinterest, it's just like mind blowing, this sea of infographics. But what I would say is go for quality, not quantity. Think about that data and really create something that's really aesthetically strong and isn't just, again, throwing data with pie charts and bar charts and line graphs and all this stuff onto a graphic, but find a way to really tell a visually interesting story that causes people to want to stop and engage with the infographic. And it's something that rather than publishing one once a week, publish one once a month and really put some effort into it. I think those out there who might be brands that don't have design resources available to them, think about how, if you've got data, there may be some design companies out there that want to share their bill on a really, really interesting infographic by partnering up. And so at the bottom of an infographic or someplace on there, you can always brand it and say, data provided by and designed by, and kind of share the limelight, so to speak, if you have a well-placed infographic that ends up getting placed in a media outlet or some very popular blog or online news source. So for our clients, for instance, I'm trying to remember in both cases. In one case, one of our clients wanted to get placed. They didn't quite get there in time, so they ended up publishing it on their own blog, which obviously has much more limited audience in comparison to a publication of some sorts. And the other individual had gotten it published on a major tech website, and so there was much more visibility and so on. And they've continued to use that same infographic elsewhere. And in fact, I saw it on Pinterest just this morning. So at any rate, I mean, some of my other tips are on there, but I think it's really about telling a really good narrative about how that information, that data all fits together, and then thinking about how to kind of express that and evoke some sort of great kind of experience as people go through and read all of that information that you've put out there.
Yeah. And it's funny, you mentioned, seeing an infographic and adding it to Pinterest and not actually diving into the infographic. And I wonder how prevalent that behavior is, because I actually found myself doing the same. I was sort of passing along infographics thinking, oh, well, I'm sure somebody will get some use out of this. So I'd tweet it out or put it on Pinterest or whatever. And I suddenly started realizing, like, hey, I'm not actually looking at any of these things. I've no longer, consume information off of an infographic. I'm more passing it along thinking, oh, somebody down the line is going to get value out of this. And, I wonder if everybody's doing that, we're all sort of blowing the numbers up on these things without actually getting value out of it. It looks like there's tens of thousands of views because people are posting it on Twitter and going, oh, well, I'll get value out of linking to this. But if then nobody's actually stopping to look at that infographic and get information out of it, I wonder if we're sort of, inflating the infographic bubble, and that suddenly we're all going to realize, oh, we've created these things, but it turns out no one's actually reading them anymore because, we've lowered the bar a little bit on quality.
I agree. And I think we're special cases, we're pinning things more than the average male, let alone the average person. I would be really interested to see some metrics behind somebody like a Mashable or some of these other publications that are publishing infographics on a fairly regular basis. And what they're, if there's any particular spikes in those. I've seen somebody like Mashable go from publishing what seemed to be an infographic every maybe month or a couple weeks,
yep,
to literally every other day.
Yeah. Well, it feels like the new 10 things post, where back in the day, everybody was like, oh, if you're going to have a blog, you need to write 10 things or 10 things you need to know about marketing on YouTube, or 10 things you need to know to improve your Pinterest profile. And that was like the formula, and everybody used it. But I had that same thought. Well, are we all just writing these and nobody's actually reading them? So I wonder if, infographics is sort of the new 10 things post where it's like, oh, you've got to be creating these infographics, and we're doing it because it seems like the right thing to do. But if nobody's engaging, then, we're kind of inflating the bubble without actually getting value out of it. So it would be interesting to get some numbers and maybe compare, the number of comments on an infographic post versus the number of Twitter shares. Because like I said, I'd imagine people still share them a lot because, it's something visual and it's something cool to share. But I wonder if people are actually, getting value out of the information you're sharing.
So essentially what you're saying is the moral of the story is that there's the likelihood that there is far more pass on than there is consumption in regards to infographics right now. That's your educated guess.
Yeah, that's my hypothesis, which, not necessarily a bad thing. I'm sure I'm not saying that nobody out there is reading these things, and there's definitely some advantage to just getting your brand name out there and getting your brand passed along. I'm just saying that if you've got a lot of really good, valuable information, maybe accent that with an infographic, but don't put all your eggs in the infographic basket thinking, oh, well, this thing has huge pass along, so now suddenly everybody's, absorbing this information. It may just be that it's getting passed along as a way of, sort of boosting our own, hey, look what I found score. So, maybe it put an infographic in addition to a blog post, or, put together a podcast or a video where you talk about the topic in addition to an infographic. I think that.
So using it as something to supplement and enhance a post that you already have. I think that's actually a great suggestion.
Yeah, definitely.
What's up next?
So sharing the experience with photos, and this, I think you were talking about both Instagram and the new photo capabilities of Facebook.
Yeah, I think I was trying to make the connections regarding the fact that Facebook has already been doing. I think we talked about this in the past, where Facebook has already done a lot to train people on how to just look at an image and then share it if they're interested, especially when it comes to, say, brands.
Yep.
And so I've seen a lot of folks, especially who I noted in the post, was Red Bull. So Red Bull on Facebook has some really kind of striking images because they're very kind of X Games, extreme sports style way. That's all their imagery, and they've just basically translated that over directly into Instagram, and they get quite a lot of engagement. So I wanted to show the direct translation of that over onto the small mobile device onto Instagram. And actually, I've seen a number of small businesses do the same thing, which I also kind of referenced there in the post regarding Rickshaw Bag Works in San Francisco here, where on their page, they're always showing off kind of things related to what they're doing at their business or the custom bags that they're making and all the different cool things they're doing visually with that, all the way to showing off the community where they live, where they're really strong San Franciscans and they're all about the bike community over there and so on. And they've translated that and they started to kind of ease their way into that over on Instagram as well. And so, of course, the difference is that Instagram is just boom, that's it. It's the image. Whereas on Facebook, it's a mix of a few different things, both image and text and so on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the image that you've posted here, I think actually represents an interesting trend. So it's one of the Red Bull motorcycle athletes, and he's doing a trick where he's not actually touching the motorcycle. So it looks like he's just flying through the air. And on that image, there's over 22,000 likes and 1,300 comments, but then there's actually 3,500 shares, which means that 3,500 people wanted to repost that image on their own Facebook page and kind of show it to their friends. So I thought it was interesting to see the number of shares actually eclipsing the number of comments. And again, this kind of speaks to that earlier point of, creating content that people not necessarily engage with and want to comment on, but they do want to pass along and forward to their friends and say, hey, look at this thing and look what I found. I think it's, we've sort of that's largely what's driving a lot of the interest in Pinterest is this, hey, look what I found mentality, and kind of showing off your ability to source interesting photos and interesting products. So, as a brand, how do you take advantage of that? How do you provide people with interesting things that they can then find and repurpose and reshare to their own community as a way of building up their own value? And you're sort of helping them along with that. And if they can see you as a brand that's a source of a lot of this information that they themselves can get credit for discovering, they're more likely to return and become the voice of your brand. I think that's an interesting trend.
Well, and even more so, what I was alluding to was this sort of sharing the experience, right? That especially with Instagram being a mobile platform, wherever you are, you can capture an experience and share it right there. You're on the go someplace, you're traveling, you're right in the middle of doing something at work. And there are folks that want to see behind the scenes snapshots of what's going on, or behind the scenes sneak peeks at something being made, or processes of when you're working on a particular product or project. And that's really an advantage of Instagram. And as I say, opening up with the post, is a picture's worth 1,000 words. And as cliche as it is, it's true. And so I think that's where Instagram is kind of striking a chord with the right brands and those folks who can really use it to their advantage. Somebody like a law firm, right? It may not be able to make the same impact as some other companies with Instagram, but if you really think about how to just have it with you and identify times of the day or opportunities where you can grab a snapshot of what you're doing and share it with folks, especially those who are most passionate about your brand, then you can start to potentially gather a bit of a following. The other thing that I hadn't really thought of as much as well is the fact that Instagram cross posts so well onto Facebook and Twitter, that it really isn't just an Instagram centric community. You can reach out and actually use it to your advantage to duplicate your content, right? And to use that content elsewhere. So I think it's interesting. I don't know about you, but when Instagram first came out, there were a couple other kind of competitors, including Path right now, which is kind of really taken a huge turn in a different direction in a way, or kind of evolved their product. But I didn't think Instagram was that big of a deal. To me, Instagram was just doing what a lot of photo apps did on the iPhone already, which was shoot photos and add a filter to it.
Right.
I think the only thing that was different about it, which of course now has shown to be its biggest strength, is the fact that it was social, and it was a social network unto itself. And so I was really surprised actually to see it gain so much traction, and almost slightly more surprised to see it become as popular as it has in the last, say, 6 months, after the whole, hey, Obama's using Instagram and these folks are using Instagram and so on. But it really has, I mean, as we saw by those numbers, it is not just kind of like one of those other cool popular sites for early adopters. There are a significant number of people using it, and we're going to see it. I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't double in the next 6 months due to the fact that Android users can now use it.
Oh yeah, and I think I'm not sure if they've made this definitive statement lately, but I know at South by they mentioned that their goal in the near term is actually 100 million users, which would be tripling their current audience. So they've got lofty aspirations, but given the pretty solid growth they've already shown and the addition of Android and how strong the take-up initially has been on that, I wouldn't be surprised to see them reach that goal by the end of the year. And I think one of the advantages that they've got is, they do have this network advantage, but it's also who makes up that network. So we've talked about Obama and the fact that, we've sort of got this new test for a network, which is Obama on it? And as soon as Obama joins your social network, you've pretty much crossed into the mainstream and people are going to check it out. But there is a lot to be said for that. People want this really close access to these celebrities and these politicians and athletes and musicians. And I remember one of the first users on Instagram was actually Snoop Dogg, and I've been following him for a while, and it's been really interesting because he posts, behind the scenes photos, and it's really a glimpse into his life and a look that you don't often see. And that was, I think, what a lot of people, when they were following Justin Bieber, that was like if you were like a teen girl, that was the ultimate ability for you, is to kind of peer into Justin Bieber's life and see what he does on a day-to-day basis. And his first photo was actually just a bunch of traffic, and that's what made it really funny, is he just posted pictures of like cars. He was sitting in traffic, and it got like 6,000 likes in one day, and all these girls discovered suddenly Justin Bieber was on Instagram, and you could find out the traffic that he was sitting in. So there's definitely something interesting about that access and that behind the scenes look. And I think the brands that do well at that are the ones that go beyond just the, here's a really well composed shot of our latest line for a fashion company, or, here's a really good picture of our product packaging. It's like, okay, well, I could just go to the store and see that. What I want to see is, something like Threadless, where they're taking you into their distribution facility and showing photos of what their warehouse looks like, or showing photos of what it looks like on packaging day when they've just got all this stuff strewn about and they're frantically trying to fill orders to meet the, all the sales that they made over a long weekend or something like that. I think that's, really interesting. And the more comfortable you get with showing that behind the scenes side of your business, the better I think you're going to do on something like Instagram, where really, people want to go beyond the highly polished marketing materials. They want to get the raw feed. They want to get more of that behind the scenes information, because they've committed to following you and really getting every single update that you put out there.
Well, and that's all in an effort because they want to have a connection with you, right? They want to build a rapport. Mm-hmm. And so, for instance, as human beings, you don't build a rapport with somebody by always being completely formal and perfect. You build a rapport with somebody by actually being somewhat kind of open and vulnerable sometimes even. At least that's my perspective on it. And so brands in a way have to be willing to not always be perfect, because people gravitate towards kind of, there's an authenticity, right? An authenticity about just being able to check out, like, well, what's going on behind the scenes, and who are the people here, and what are the experiences that are going on? And something else that you kind of reminded me of is that this whole marketing with images now isn't the difficulties people have are not just about the fact that they've got to now understand design versus wordsmithing. Okay. Mm-hmm. It's also about how to have the mindset beyond maybe one or two individuals at the company, how to have the mindset to understand what to capture even.
Yeah.
I think like identifying those moments, it's incredibly easy on a daily basis to identify at minimum one moment a day that you could just share that would give a little insight into what is going on in your day, or what kind of, project are you working on, or something cool that your fans and folks connected to you would eat up. But I can't tell you how many folks that I've talked to who, for instance, when it even comes to Twitter, that's a big problem for folks, is to understand, well, what would I talk about? What would I share? What would I? So it still boils down to the same problem folks were having initially when it came to social media in general and trying to create social brands. But now it's boiling over to now suddenly, well, what do I capture? My company's doesn't have anything compelling. What are the people that I'm connected to interested in? And so I think once you're able to kind of change that mindset, which is a little bit of an obstacle at first, and you couple that with a real understanding of who your audience is, mm-hmm. then it finally clicks. And then you worry about all the design stuff and everything, because if you can't get those other things correct, if you can't understand what is it that my audience feels matters and is interesting and is compelling, then and who is my audience, period, then you've got bigger problems than whether or not you're taking a photo of traffic or some cool concert you're doing it, with Justin Bieber.
Yeah. And I would say that most brands probably underestimate the amount of things that somebody would want to see from them. So
Yep.
similar to the way when brands were first getting up and running on Twitter, and it was like, oh, I don't want to talk about the food we're having at the office cafeteria, and I don't want to talk about, all the meetings that I'm going into. And it was like, well, I don't really think that people want to know that much about the company. And then we found out that, yeah, actually people do want to, they want to know some of these things. And they don't want you to just go on there every day at noon and only post what you're having for lunch that day. But at the same time, the occasional, like, hey, the office just had a barbecue. Like, here's a picture of the food we enjoyed or something like that, especially for like a small business. That brings you in and makes you feel like part of the family. And, it's not something that you always have to shy away from. I think that, we sort of think that, oh, people only want the very best content, and I have to be 100% certain that everybody's going to like this update. And I think that, people are more willing to just kind of take it as it comes. And, you're just one photo in a stream of photos in somebody's timeline. And so if one particular photo doesn't ring a bell with them, it doesn't mean they're going to unsubscribe. They're just going to scroll to the next photo. And, if you string a couple of bad ones together, sure, you might lose a couple of followers. But if they've indicated that they want that type of content, they're following you on Instagram, and they're basically saying with that follow, hey, I want, some of this more behind the scenes, some of this more raw information, then they're not the type of person that one bad photo they're gonna unfriend and they're gonna leave and you're never gonna talk to them again. I think they're, you definitely, and especially now is the time to kind of take those risks and find out what content your audience engages with. And you're not going to hit 100% out of the ballpark, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't be willing to experiment a little bit and see what does work.
Yeah. What's the motto here for the show again?
Always be experimenting. Exactly. And what's funny though is, and I actually wanted to bring this up and get your take on it, is while we're talking about this behind the scenes, we actually used Red Bull as an example, and Red Bull, pretty obviously, and I don't even think they're subtle about it, they take all of their photos with really high-end camera equipment and then just repost that to Instagram. Yeah. And I think, part of it is just the fact that, like, Red Bull, like you said, their stuff is just so cool and so amazing that seeing it in this high-quality, really, crisp imagery and angles and wide angle lenses that you just wouldn't be able to get out of a phone. I think it suits their brand in a way that's kind of unique to them, but I wouldn't recommend that a lot of brands look at it and say, oh, well, Red Bull posts things taken with a DSLR or, taken with these really high quality cameras. I should too. I think that for most brands, the way to go is probably just to say, hey, let's, use that camera on the back of that iPhone we just got and embrace the fact that Instagram isn't this perfect polished network. There is a lot of, it's purposefully kind of grimy. It's purposefully kind of old school and retro. And, it doesn't need to be, like I said, it doesn't need to be that polished marketing image. It should be a little more of that, hey, I just carry this camera around with me and I saw something cool and I took a picture of it. I didn't make everybody pose and line up the perfect shot. This is just what I saw and I want to share it with you.
No, I agree. Actually, I was going to circle back to that as well. And I think you make a great point that although if you check out Red Bull, they've got a lot of engagement, but it suits them, and that's not the ideal formula. I think always be experimenting. If your brand, if there's something about your brand that just requires that, then that's fine. Maybe you try that out and see how it works. But really, the cool factor of Instagram is being able to be on the go and using your mobile device. And if you come off far too polished, you obviously are going to kind of create a little bit of friction with the rest of the Instagram community that expects to see certain things in certain ways. I was trying to think. There's been in the past, I think when Instagram first started to really catch on, you would actually see a lot of people that obviously had photos that were photoshopped.
Yeah.
Or taken from some other source that was definitely not off of a mobile device. in Photoshop, whether it be retouched or Photoshop, meaning like you'd see some dude like shooting lasers out of his eyes and and doing crazy stuff, and
I've seen that in real life. I just didn't have my camera on me to capture it, but that one might not have been Photoshop. That one might have been real.
So maybe it was real, and the guy was just snapped the shot right there. But I haven't seen it. I haven't actually seen, when I was thinking about it right now, I just haven't seen those images that much at all. Actually, lately, I've seen that. I think there's one user that I know that I follow that tends to use more. He's using stuff in the camera. So for instance, one of my tips was to use an app called Diptic, Diptic, I think it is. I always feel like I'm saying something bad when I say it, but that app will allow you to take one photo, two photos, three photos, and kind of create panels inside the photos. So you'll take the size of one photo. The dimensions for one photo will fit like 3 or 4 panels with other little photos in it, almost comic strip style. And so you can shoot photos directly from your device, but you could potentially give different angles and more than one part of the subject. And so I've seen folks, for instance, who are very fashion oriented, show an outfit that they're wearing, and so they'll shoot multiple shots. They'll shoot one of them just standing there, but then another one that'll show like a close up of the pattern on the shirt, and then like maybe a shot of the shoes. And that'll be in 3 panels in one image. So that way they can get it's like telling the entire story or encapsulating the experience in one photo. And I think that's perfectly fine. I don't think there's any issues with that. I don't think it removes the authenticity or any of that kind of stuff. And as Jason Falls calls it, I don't want to be a tree hugger when it comes to social media and try to be this social media purist in a sense, because we have to balance. There has to be a balance of things, but it's what that community there expects, and so you don't want to push that kind of high gloss, high quality feel too far, or it's just not going to get the same level of engagement.
Yeah, and I think I'm a fan of Diptic as well. I've used that for a couple of different photos, and it goes back to that idea we touched on previously, which is telling a story with your images. So anytime you can really create a story and walk through not just one, but maybe a couple of different images. And, I think even something like for a fashion brand, showing off different parts of an outfit, that's really telling a story about that outfit in a way that just a further back photo of the entire outfit wouldn't do. You're really highlighting specific things that you want to call attention to, and it's sort of directing the viewer for you and saying, hey, these are the things that I want to show, or this is how this scene progressed. And doing that all in one image, I think it's definitely a more advanced feature. This is for our advanced listeners that are already kind of using and comfortable with Instagram. Maybe that's the next step for them, but definitely something to try out if you're looking to, maybe just try something a little different with your Instagram feed. And on the flip side, though, I think, on one hand, you don't need to be perfect, but on the other, there was an interesting stat that came out that said maybe you don't want to be too much on the grungy retro side. And this was a study that was actually posted about on the Daily Mail, which is a UK-based, I think it's either a magazine or newspaper. And so they had a survey. They actually asked 1,671 Facebook users what their biggest irritation was on Facebook when it comes to photos. And actually 61% said images taken with photo apps such as Instagram, implying that the retro filters that people apply to their pictures before posting it on Facebook was actually their number one annoyance. And this actually beat out baby photos, which only got 58% of the vote. So
annoying, man.
I know, stupid retro babies. If you take a picture of your baby with Instagram, it's pretty much 100%. Nobody likes that.
Friends on Facebook if you do that.
Yeah, you can only post those on MySpace. Those are banned from Facebook. You lose all your friends, all your credibility.
Retro baby photos with the glitter effect on it on MySpace.
Yeah, and part of me wonders. So, like I said, Daily Mail. It's a UK based news source. So I wonder if this is maybe a difference between the US and the UK audience. Perhaps the US audience is a little more retro oriented right now, and we're sort of getting used to that type of content. And I think there's obviously a demand for it somewhere because, just the sheer number of Android users that have been waiting for months, and the second this thing is out, they're using it and they're taking these photos and sharing these photos, indicates that there is a pretty large group of people out there that like the photos and want to be part of that community. But at the same time, I think you do need to be careful not to take one extreme or the other. You don't want to be too polished, but you also don't want to be applying every single grunge filter you can get your hands on until it no longer looks like a photo. It looks like some sort of modern art piece. So, tell the story, and if the filter helps to make that look the way that you want it to look, by all means, go for that. But don't just, slap a bunch of filters on it and call it a day and say, oh, well, this is just what people do. I think, tell it in a way that fits with your brand and fits with the way that you want people to perceive your brand.
Well, and I've actually been finding myself posting a lot of photos with no filters more and more and more.
Sure.
Because the filter is not necessarily what makes it. It's the cool picture. It's the subject matter. And the filter either enhances it or doesn't. And kind of as you're saying and alluding to, could really screw it up. So don't throw a filter on it just because filters exist. The photo itself is really what people are there for. And I think you could do really cool things just by posting a regular old photo. When you have a mobile phone, you have an opportunity to really hold the camera in really awesome ways and get some cool angles that might be a little more difficult with having a full-blown camera with you and so on. And so I challenge folks to just really think about the composition of the image and having fun with that. And the fact that you don't have this camera with a huge lens, which can be kind of foreboding, for instance, it makes a huge difference. If you've got this camera with the big lens and a big red light on it, when in a flash and all that whole 9 yards, it can change the way that even, for instance, if you're taking photos of people, it can just change the dynamics of the energy in the room where people see this big glass eye staring at them. And wonder what you're doing. But when you just kind of whip out that iPhone and take a photo of them, it's a little more inconspicuous. And I've heard a lot of people talk about a similar dynamic with flip cameras or taking videos with smaller devices, that it can actually allow you to take some cool shots that you might not otherwise be able to get had you had this big, huge SLR or something with you.
Yeah, definitely. So next up, what do you say we dive into? There's either Facebook timeline research, which could continue this trend of looking at some interesting data points, or a couple of unique Pinterest marketing examples.
Oh, sorry. What was the first choice you gave me?
First choice was Facebook timeline research around the newly released Facebook timeline features for brands.
The reason I think we should go there real quick is, we've been talking a lot about storytelling. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is the direction that Facebook is going with their timeline. And it's actually, they alluded to that here in the link that we'll share, where we're kind of going off of here for this particular story. But I'll let you get to that, and I want to make sure that we really talk about that storytelling element, because I think that's where the timeline is going there. But go ahead and talk about the study.
Sure thing. So this was a study put on by Simple Usability, and we'll link to the actual blog post in the show notes here. But basically what it was is an eye tracking study on 6 brands' timelines. So American Express, Pizza Hut, Coca-Cola, Gap, Coldplay, and Manchester United. So obviously all pretty large brands that people are more than likely going to be familiar with. And so they sat people down in front of a computer and showed them these pages for the first time, and just kind of watched as they interacted with the page and paid attention to what they looked at and what they engaged with. And I thought the couple of the findings were pretty interesting, and it did make me wonder a little bit if it's maybe premature to start gathering data like this. I think people are still getting used to the idea of a timeline and exactly where to get their information, but it's at least some food for thought if you're still in the process of figuring out exactly what your new timeline strategy is going to be. So the first thing that they found, and this was actually something that surprised me a little bit, is the fact that cover photos actually weren't that important. And really, they found that the entire top of the Facebook page was in large part ignored by a lot of fans when they were going to a brand's Facebook page. So they basically scrolled right past the cover photo and the number of likes and the abouts and even the apps, and dropped down right into the timeline and said, let me see what's getting posted here. I want to see the actual new information being posted by the brand. And part of it is, a lot of these people said, oh, well, I don't look at the cover photo. That's the advertising space. That's where brands are trying to market and advertise to me. And, I know that I can ignore that and I'm not missing much, which I thought was kind of interesting. It's probably true for the most part. But, I think Facebook has tried to curb some of that by not allowing brands to put calls to action or links or anything like that in the cover photo. They're really trying to force brands to use that cover photo just as part of their visual story that they're telling using the page. But it was interesting to see that people have already recognized, that's the marketing part. You can skip that and jump down into the timeline, which for most brands is probably also the marketing part, but it still seems to be something that people are more interested in engaging with.
Yeah, I'd be interested. I know that we have a few folks listening to us live, and in fact, a few of those folks are interacting with me on Facebook. So if you hear the clickety clack here on the podcast, I apologize. But I'd be interested to know what you guys think. But as you said, kind of at the very beginning, Corey, it's new. I mean, it was forced upon everybody of the 30th of March, and we're now, 3-4 days later?
Yep.
At the time that we record this. And so, and I think we even talked about this a while back ago, that right now it's still something where people are trying to get used to behaving with a timeline. Like, now that you have the Facebook timeline and you can go all the way back to the birth of a company or the birth of a celebrity or whatever it is. And there are some companies that are doing that. I've seen Cisco has put, like, when they were founded, when they're, major milestones from the CEOs that came in, and when the company went public and all this kind of stuff. Same thing with Microsoft and some others. I don't know how many people actually go back there and take a look at it. I don't see any engagement back there. And in fact, the only reason I went back there is because of the podcast and other things that I'm doing related to this business. But I don't think that the average person has yet kind of grown accustomed to doing that. And so I think it's premature to really quantify whether or not it's effective or what people are doing at the moment. I mean, we're talking 5 days old.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, like I said, there's definitely more to be learned about this. And I wouldn't take this study as the end all be all of data and, let's, just abandon the idea of creating a cool cover photo because nobody pays attention to that. I think that we'll definitely see trends emerging, but, one thing that actually did sort of align with what I was expecting is the idea that when people jumped down to the timeline, they actually did go back and look through some of the content. So, they highlighted the fact that the timeline itself as a feature is important, but at the same time, not a lot of people went further back than about a month. And so while Facebook gives you the ability to really fill out your profile since the beginning of when your company first existed, and I think there's some value to putting in major milestones, it doesn't yet look like something that Facebook users, maybe they're even, know that that's possible or expect to be able to find interesting information back there. So not a lot of users are going back further than a month. So, the takeaway from that would be, it doesn't mean you shouldn't put anything there, but don't spend, the next month trying to fill out every small detail of your company's history. I think make sure there's some content there, and then probably, focus your efforts elsewhere.
Part of the reason why I think that folks only go back a month is because when you go back to the beginning of the current month, I think, is when it kind of stops for a second and has to load all the rest of the content. That's my personal opinion, is when you start going back, then it pauses for a second, and Facebook can be a little wonky. And so it kind of pauses and then kind of loads after a while, depending on how much content is there. So in my opinion, that could be part of the reason why people do that. In asking the question here, so we've got Ramon who's listening right now, and he says, actually, no, I pay a lot, big capital letters, a lot of attention to the cover image. I think it speaks to how much a brand understands who they are and if they are trying to engage or market to their fans. And then he shows me a few other folks. He shows me an example of somebody he feels could really pay more attention to that cover image and make themselves stand out more. And really, I think it goes back to, again, telling a story and telling personality, which is something you couldn't really do quite well before, because all you had was your profile image. That was it.
Yeah.
And now you have kind of a larger canvas to do so. And then I also look at it as like the timeline. The when I first saw that they were allowing brands to use the new timeline, they initially had they initially made it very apparent what their rules and restrictions were. So you couldn't have calls to actions, you couldn't say something was on sale, you couldn't have really marketing messages up there. And myself, I think some brands kind of thought that was cruddy. My personal opinion was that was awesome.
Yeah,
that was almost like Facebook saying, "Look, folks, get creative. Learn how to show some personality and really tell people who you are, and this kind of go back to what we talked about. Tell a story, create an experience with this canvas that we're giving you, without being all about sales."
Yeah.
And I think that they're moving in that direction more with other things. I think that they are still potentially lacking in a few other areas. I want to see how much engagement you can get in the area of the buttons, the other apps that you can add to your profiles. Because as the study says, and again, I agreed that it was a bit premature, that people aren't even clicking on the apps. And the apps essentially are the main navigation points for the rest of the brand pages. Or for the rest of your brand page. And so if you can't get people to click on that, then essentially a brand page just becomes one big Facebook profile with, photos and images and video, and text all streaming down a timeline instead of something much more. And so I'm really interested to see how they've made those buttons more visual than they were previously, when they were tabs on the side and they were just like little pieces of text in the second iteration of brand pages. But I'm really, really interested to see how Facebook apps will kind of evolve specifically for brand pages, and how much people will actually engage with them. And I think the difference will be made when folks feel compelled to click on those things. And I don't know whether it's going to have to be driven by something that the brands do, or whether users themselves will get used to the behavior, a new behavior, because brand pages are now using the timeline.
Yeah.
So only time will tell, I guess, huh? We should read this.
The study itself said, the users that they were following didn't actually interact with the apps. Really, the only one that they clicked on was the Photos app, which is the default app for every page. So it does make me wonder if, Facebook maybe is pushing brands towards using media dollars to promote their pages that they've already spent a lot of dollars to create. I wouldn't be entirely surprised by that. But it seems like initially, at least, people are still getting familiar with the fact that, oh yeah, there is, a bunch of apps here, and there's other things that I can click on the page besides just the timeline. So that will be an interesting behavior to pay attention to, and especially because a lot of brands have put a lot of time and effort into really building out these other applications. And so if it turns out that with this new timeline layout, people aren't really going there, maybe you need to call that out inside of the timeline with updates that point people towards those applications, or like I said, use media dollars to point people there. It'll be interesting to see how brands react to that shift in behavior.
So what's going next? Are we going to go to the Pinterest stuff? I know we talked about it so much, but there's a lot of cool stuff coming out that warrants talking about it.
Yeah, let's just do a quick run through of a couple interesting Pinterest marketing campaigns that appeared over the last week. And then I do want to make sure we get to the future of coffee shops. So maybe just a quick run through of these Pinterest campaigns, and if you have any thoughts on them, we can share those, and then we'll get to the coffee shop. How's that sound?
So that's code for make it short, man. We got more important stuff to talk about.
That is. So first one that came up was actually from Guilt Group, and Guilt is always doing interesting things. We talked about their experimenting with Clout a couple episodes ago, and now they're experimenting with Pinterest, which in my opinion, their Pinterest experiment is much more successful than their Cloud experience. But,
that's true. That's true.
What they did, which I thought was interesting, and this is actually easily replicatable by other brands.
Replicable,
something like that. That's a tough word. I'll skip that one. But they put up a picture of one of their products and said that if it reached a certain number of repins, they would actually unlock a special deal just for their Pinterest followers. So they put the line at 50. They said as soon as we get 50 repins on this, we'll unlock a deal that's above and beyond the deal that our normal customers get access to. And the only way to get that deal would to then be to return to their Pinterest page and click on that pin and actually go to the item from Pinterest. So that was interesting, both for driving repins, but also, really tapping into that existing behavior that Pinterest users have of finding things they like, repinning it, sharing it with their audience. And then also, driving people to return to the page. The only way to see if the deal was active would be to check back and say, okay, well, how many repins does it have now? And then once it was over that 50 pin mark, it was a limited time offer. So there was sort of this, urgency to it, which I thought was smart of them to add to that promotion as well. That way, it wasn't like, oh, well, now there's this 48-hour window and I can take advantage of it whenever. It was really driving towards an immediate action.
Yeah, I think this was when I saw that the story about this, I thought it's actually one of the best, if not the best. I mean, the other one that we'll talk about in just a second too, if we get to it, is pretty awesome as well. But I think this is one of the first really cool all around ways that somebody has said, look, let's just try this with Pinterest. And I think some of the things to note, at first, I thought they did it programmatically. I thought that they, spent some time working with the API or something like that in order to develop something out really slick and cool. In fact, they didn't. They just engaged with people directly on Pinterest and published it to a few folks and spread the word and used everything that Pinterest had available and made one of their pins a destination of engagement. And the image that they used, they optimized the image, meaning that they simply made sure that it had a call to action. It was clear to understand what it was that they were trying to achieve. And therefore, when it got repinned, when other folks saw it, it communicated what they wanted, right? So they drove people to a call to action and said, look, you need to repin this, and this is why. And then when it got repinned, it provided more visibility for an item that they were going to have on sale. And then, just like you said, when people ended up coming back, or they needed to come back in order to see, like, well, was this thing available? And then lastly, they made it time-based. So it was something that was happening in the here and now. And so they could have a finite beginning and a finite ending to the whole thing, and then be able to eventually measure the results by the exact, sales for that particular item. What was the engagement on that particular pin? I thought that when they asked people to do 50 repins before they would unlock the sale, that was actually very, very achievable. 50 is really small, but I believe that that's the reason they did that is they wanted it to be successful.
Yeah.
They said, well, let's see how far we can push it afterwards. So I thought it was incredibly creative and, really good on them.
Definitely. So the other one that caught my eye recently was a campaign from Peugeot, and that's
Say it again?
Peugeot, I believe.
You're right.
That's as close as I'm going to get to that.
It's not Peugeot, as I used to call it.
It's not Peugeot, no. So Peugeot, a car company, it's a European car company, and they actually did something interesting, which was respond quickly to the redesign of Pinterest. So much like a lot of users have done, they actually took the new board layout and pin specific images to that in a specific order so that it would create an image of the car when you viewed their profile page. And so, this is similar to, you saw people doing this on their Facebook profile when Facebook used to put a string of images along the top. And so people would kind of game that system so that it made one big image. A brand doing this on Pinterest I thought was interesting, and it really, kind of creates this big visually striking image on their page, which grabs your attention. But then what they did, which was really interesting, is they turned it into a puzzle or a game. And so they had these bigger images, but then part of the image was missing. They purposefully hid some of these images. And the only way to, or the way to solve the puzzle was to actually go and find the missing images. So they put this out there and then they said, hey, these are the images that are missing. We've actually hid them on our Facebook page and our website. And if you can go and find this, you'll be entered into a contest to win a prize. And I thought that was really interesting and smart use, both of the new layout and taking advantage of it and saying, okay, well, what can we do here that's going to be interesting and unique? But then taking it a step further and saying, okay, well, how do we engage people and how do we get people interested in what we're doing? Well, we'll offer a prize. And, let's not just do the boring old, enter your name here for a sweepstakes. Let's make people hunt around and go to our other channels and engage with our other content as a way of, really diving into the Peugeot experience and getting to check out their Facebook page and getting to check out their website and learning more about the car as you go, with the eventual opportunity of winning a prize. I thought that was a really interesting utilization of a number of different things inside of a single campaign.
Yeah, again, I think it's really, really cool that how they're looking at ways that they could leverage what Pinterest already does to make it really, really fun and engaging. And I think that in the case of other networks as well beyond Pinterest, that people are lacking in that creativity. And those guys, they didn't look to see if somebody else was doing it already. They created something brand new and just tried it. And it's got some press at minimum, even if it didn't get a lot of engagement, it's got some press. They're getting some earned media off of this a bit. And I think that it's really, really cool that these guys, both Peugeot and Guilt, did this. So I'm looking forward to seeing some other folks use this in creative ways as well.
All right. So finally, the much anticipated story of the future world in which everything is a coffee shop. So I guess so
that's a story all about Starbucks taking over the world, isn't it?
That's pretty much it. Starbucks at this point has done enough really high quality Solomo marketing that they are the future. They're going to be the place that you buy your car from. They're going to be the place that you buy your clothes from. We're heading towards the Starbucks utopia. No, actually, this was
Google that did that, but I guess it's Starbucks.
Ooh, yeah, that's Google at one point was the promise, the Google future, but they're running into some speed bumps along that road.
Self-driving cars running on Starbucks coffee.
There we go. Combine the two. So this was actually a story that caught my eye a few weeks ago. And it was one of those stories where I read it and then I just kept thinking about it. I would come back to it throughout the day and be like, oh man, that's, this thing that I just found out fits into that model, or that thing that I just am reading about right now fits into that model. And one of the recent bits of news that again kind of reiterated this story was the fact that Best Buy, during their recent Q4 earnings announcement, announced that they were actually closing 50 of their stores and opening up 100 of their mobile kiosk stores. So basically, cutting down 50 of their lowest performing stores, and that's no small feat. This is closing 50 giant retail outlets and instead opening up 100 of these really small, basically, gadget vending machines. If you've done any traveling lately, you've likely seen them in airports, and it sounds like they're actually going to, in addition to airports, be putting them out into shopping centers and other places. But it's basically the shrinking of Best Buy away from being an actual retail establishment and towards a vending machine. And it made me think about this, this in the future, everything will be a coffee shop blog post. And really what that blog post is saying is that if you look at trends in the way that, in a number of trends, in the way that we're receiving products, in the way that we're shopping for things, in the way that we're interacting with companies, it's really working towards this online world where a lot of our interaction happen online and happen through social media, where you don't really need a big physical space to go and interact with a company. And you especially don't need, a big retail type place where every product is laid out before you to kind of allow you to put your hands on it and play around with it. We put a lot of trust and value in things like Amazon reviews, to where you really don't need to actually, use something yourself in order to get a feel for it. You kind of trust that, okay, well, if 50 other people have seen this thing and said, yes, it's high quality, and I've been using it for a couple months now and it hasn't broken down, that, if you order it, you feel kind of comfortable that yes, that you're going to have a very similar experience. And so I thought that, Best Buy is sort of, whether they want to or not, they're kind of realizing this trend. And I think for a number of years, people said, oh, well, Best Buy, that's the place where you go to try things out before you buy it on Amazon. And, this seems to be proving that idea was true, that a lot of people were going to Best Buy and, testing cameras and listening to those speakers, but then going online where prices were cheaper, and the companies that didn't have that huge overhead were able to just undercut them on price, and they were actually buying things online. So the idea of, in the future, everything is a coffee shop, is that we still need a place to go to kind of hang out and get out of the house for a little bit, and maybe have really good internet access. But the best place for that is a coffee shop. You see a lot of people in Starbucks, and they're shopping on eBay or they're shopping on Amazon. So why not just create a bunch of different Starbucks, or not Starbucks specifically, but a lot of different coffee shops, and maybe Best Buy, they could have a place where you can hang out, and it's got these smaller form kind of kiosk stores where you can still get products from them. But really, it's, hey, we've got a person there and he can answer your questions, but we just want you to hang out and do some shopping online. And then whenever you order something, we'll ship it from our warehouse. And that saves us having to have this huge retail establishment. We can ship everything out of one central location, and, you still get to relax and shop in a pleasant environment. But it's an interesting shift towards, a world in which a lot of these retail companies just no longer make financial sense.
Another company out there that starts with a B that also had this same growing, emerging phenomenon take them down, right? Blockbuster Video.
Ooh, good one. Yeah.
So you've got Redbox. So people are perfectly content with going, do I really need somebody to be there to hand me my DVD or my video game? No, I don't. And so it's amazing to me. And in fact, I had heard about Redbox years ago before they ever came to the US, because I believe they originated in the UK. And I was pretty blown away by how quickly it grew in popularity here in the US. Mm-hmm. And there's going to be some products and services where the model just doesn't work.
Right.
But it reminds me also of seeing, there was a post the other day that showed someplace in China, I think, a store where it was like a grocery store, but when you walked into it, it was a bunch of touch screens with products that you could flip around by tapping and scroll through, and then when you're done, you essentially walk up to the checkout counter where they got it all sitting there for, and you pay for it and you leave. Mm-hmm. And so I can see how that will work for a lot of things. As we were talking about this kind of utopia, and as somebody called it here on Facebook who's listening, they called it a brewtopia.
Ooh, I like it.
That was Aaron that called it that. You should have known. So the interesting thing, though, about that particular post was that was the one that was also talking about the education system, wasn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
And so there's so many different dynamics about this, kind of coffee shop thing. And if you're anything like me, you spend some time going to a coffee shop because it's connected to Wi-Fi. It has everything you need. It's got a bathroom. It's got food. It's got drink. It's got people. Again, add the Wi-Fi to it, and you're all good. And I think that when you have these places where folks can congregate and so on, that's really what people are looking for is connection over everything else. And we've talked about in the past that folks are looking to discover products and then become aware of whether or not it's something that they want. And they go out and they look on the web and they get highly educated about that product. They compare it to other products. They listen to their folks, their friends, and loosen and close connections, tight connections. They get that social proof, which is what you were alluding to earlier. And if it points them all in the right direction, then they don't necessarily feel the need in most cases, in a lot of cases, as we're seeing, to have to go drive out to some place to purchase something or to be faced with a sales representative.
Yeah, and this was the story that we talked about last week, right?
Yeah, exactly.
People, they're going to a store and they don't want to talk to somebody. They've got all the information. They're just there to, maybe see the product for themselves, but they don't actually want to talk to your salespeople because they're getting better information on their own. And so for them, the salesperson is actually a detractor for going in the store. If they had a way of just, putting a big sign on them that says, "Hey, don't mess with me. I know what I'm doing," they'd probably, prefer that. And they'd walk in that store and see exactly what they want to see and walk out without ever actually interacting with the salesperson. So I think, that story also points towards this trend that we're seeing of people really empowering themselves to shop in the way that they want to shop and not necessarily needing that traditional retail experience. I got a third company that starts with a B to add to the mix as well, Adam.
Barney Incorporated. Who is it?
Well, actually, close, but both Barnes and Noble and Borders, the two big bookstores.
I was so close. So Purple Dinosaur.
When you said bar, I thought you were going to get there, but you went with Barney instead of Barnes and Noble. But yeah, so one of the examples that they bring up in this blog post about everything becoming a coffee shop in the future, and I think it's probably the best way to really summarize this point, is the idea of a bookstore. So, we've already seen the big box bookstores, most of them, shut their doors and file for bankruptcy and basically say, hey, this model no longer works for us. But I think the idea of people wanting physical books hasn't necessarily gone away. People, there are certainly people that are getting all of their books on their Kindle and they've already adopted to that model, but there's still people that like that feeling of a physical book. They like the portability of it. They like the fact that, if they drop it, it's not a $200 gadget, it's a $10 paperback that doesn't actually get damaged. So what this story was talking about for the future is books on demand, and the idea that, quickly there are printers that are now capable of printing out an entire book basically while you wait. And this used to be something that had to happen in a centralized location. You had to print out thousands of copies of a book at once in order to make it financially viable to sell a single copy. You couldn't just print one copy because that would have cost way more than anybody was willing to pay for it. But now for basically the same price as a normal paperback, you can print a single issue of a book. The problem being, everybody's got to get to this printer somehow. You can't just, stick a printer in the town square and expect people to drive out and stand next to this thing while it shoots out their book. But at the same time, you could offer something like a coffee shop, give people a place to hang out for a couple of minutes while they place their order for their book and they enjoy a coffee and they maybe, grab a scone or something and relax for a couple minutes. And then when they're done, they head over to the printer, they grab their newly printed book and they head out, and they've now purchased something from you. They've made that transaction, and they didn't have to interact with a salesperson. They didn't have to interact with somebody managing the cashier. They didn't have to, use a lot of these resources that keep overhead high. You can really run a much more streamlined business that says, hey, we've got this printer, we can create the product that you need, and we can give you an experience that's enjoyable, but we don't have to have all of the things that we traditionally associate with a company that's putting out a physical object. I thought that was an interesting example of something that's actually not too hard to imagine becoming a reality.
Completely agree. And if I keep talking, we're going to go overtime. So I'm going to let you close out for the night. I know we keep making this internal promise to ourselves. We're not going to go overtime. And I actually have my stopwatch on my phone going and everything. And we're no less time than we've ever been on any show. So,
well, I told you I was passionate about this coffee shop story. So I'm glad we got to get into it. But I think I could probably go on forever. So maybe it's good that we put a stop to it.
I actually completely agree with you on that, because you and I are both kind of, I don't know if you would consider yourself like a futurist or what that term exactly entails, but I definitely can see those things happening very quickly in our lifetime, and it's extremely interesting and compelling. And it's almost a whole nother podcast, quite honestly.
Yeah.
I think we might have our spin-off. We can talk about how we love our Apple products so much, and then and the coffee shop idea.
All right. And I would say for anybody both listening to this live or checking out the recorded version of this, make sure to give that blog post a read and think of the implications that it could have for your own business. And then, if you do have some thoughts, definitely share it with us and let us know. And maybe we can return to this on a future episode and get some input from the audience and see if people think that, you and I are a little crazy and this is never going to happen, or if this rings true for a lot of other folks as well. And, we can talk about the implications it has for other industries as well.
Sure thing.
All right. So speaking of getting in touch, there's a couple of ways that you can do that, and probably more than enough. Hopefully at least one of the following works for you. But the easiest way would probably be Twitter. So the show itself has a Twitter account, and that's reachable at Solomo Show. Or you can reach us directly. I'm at Corey O'Brien.
And I'm at Secret Sushi.
We're also available on the Facebook, Google+, and Pinterest trifecta. So
and YouTube. So that's 4 legs to that.
And YouTube. We've got
that's a table. It's a coffee table.
That's exactly the coffee table in our future Solomo
ready
coffee
for the
shop.
Brutopia.
So Facebook.com/Solomo Show gets you there. And then for Google+ and Pinterest, go ahead and just search for those. Searching inside of Google+ should pop that right up. And then for Pinterest, you may have to just type Solomo Show Pinterest into your search engine of choice, and that should get you there. Finally, if you would like to reach us via email, if you've got a longer question or comment, we would love to hear from you. It's solomoshow@gmail.com. Or just reach out with, just an introduction. Just say, hey, I'm a listener and wanted to say hi and just let you know that, I like what you guys do, or I hate what you guys do, or it was thought-provoking, or just any feedback. We'd love to get that via email.
If you want to send any hate mail, that would be sent directly to Corey, please.
There you go. Don't copy Adam. And then finally, all the links that we talked about today, as well as the links that we just discussed to our various social media channels, can be found in the show notes, which are available at either solomoshow.com or on your podcast player of choice. And then we also include those, as Adam alluded to, on our YouTube page. So we put together a nice little video for each of these episodes that includes some supporting imagery, and then down below in the comments area, if you expand that, you'll see all of the links that we talk about, so make sure to check that out. And then finally, if you could spare a couple minutes and help promote the show, we would love for any ratings via iTunes. It's a great way for others to help discover the show, and iTunes actually uses an algorithm to say, this show got a lot of positive reviews. We should try to get it in front of more people when they search for shows. So any rating on iTunes would be greatly appreciated. And for those of you that actually found the show through iTunes, we have a small announcement, which is that we have updated the RSS feed for the show. We actually transitioned the show over to a FeedBurner RSS feed. So for most of you, it should actually transition over to the new feed automatically, and we'll keep both up and running for the near-term future. So shouldn't be a huge issue, but just if you could check your RSS, if that's how you get new episodes, and make sure that you've got a FeedBurner RSS feed. That way, if anything changes in the future, you'll always be guaranteed to get all of the latest episodes. And with that, I think we will call it another long episode, but another good episode. So thanks for listening, and we will see you next week.
Take care.